Hi everyone, this is Ashley with CTandRina Digitals. I'm going to do a tutorial to show how to use my new actions in my maternity workflow action collection. I've gotten a lot of questions over the last year or so about how I edit my maternity sessions, so I spent my morning taking my hand edits and creating actions for myself and also others to use in Photoshop. A lot of these I've just been using myself in Photoshop for a long time. It definitely speeds up the process when I edit my maternity photos, because my maternity photos often do take me quite a bit of time to edit. So I will jump into it. I have open the image that I am going to be using. This is after my background is filled in and all of the stuff is removed from it, obviously. And I did all my liquify and corrected any imperfections on my model that she requested, and that's what I do before playing any actions on my images at all. So I'm just going to go ahead and start. I have the collections over here. If you need help loading the actions into Photoshop, I do also have a video tutorial for that on my YouTube channel. I will link that below in the description as well if that's something that you're needing to watch to get these into your Photoshop. So I have in here, some of them are very, very simple, easy actions, and some of them are a bit more, I guess, I don't know what the word I'm trying to think of is, but they do a lot. Some of the actions do a lot more than the others do. And you may not need to use all of them. Like some of them, I have my object color change and my backdrop color change actions in here. If you're not changing your backdrop color or the color of the gown or anything in an image, you're not going to need to use those ones, obviously. So first I tried to put these in an order that I like to do myself, but again, it just depends on if I'm going to need to use it or not. So my warm up and cool down actions, I do use those a lot of the time first, but I think this image looks pretty good for what I want it for right now for my tone, so I'm actually not going to use those ones on this image, but I'll just go through them just so I can show you how they work. So the warm up action, if you just click that, go ahead and press play. All of these actions have a message that's going to come up. First, it's going to show or tell you what to do, and then there's going to be some helpful notes. These are going to be the same. The helpful notes are going to be the same under every single action, and these are just giving you reminders that if it's throwing you an error, these are things to check for within your action set. So the first one is going to say, be sure you're running the action on a flattened background layer. Now that just means, I'm going to press stop real quick. I'm going to delete this, go back to where I initially started. You need to start out on your flattened background layer. If this were to be unlocked and it's layer 0, it's not going to play right. So just make sure that if it's layer 0, you just right click and go to flatten image, and it's going to go right back to that background layer. The other one is be sure that your layer mask is selected before painting. So most of these are paint on actions. I think maybe all of them are paint on actions actually. This is your layer mask right here, this box, that you're going to make sure that's selected before you paint anything on, which it should automatically select them after you play the actions. But if it doesn't, just make sure that that's selected before painting. Sometimes I have people message me saying that the action doesn't do anything. It does. Something's just wrong with the layer. And then flatten your layers when finished. This is important because if you're playing multiple actions, if you try to play an action on an action that you already did or a layer that you're already working on, you're gonna mess everything up and it'll be all crazy. So just when you're done doing each action, just go ahead and flatten. It makes it a lot easier to just flow through what you're doing. And it also is going to save your work along the way if you're worried about losing anything. And then, of course, it says needing more help, please watch the tutorial. Obviously, you're not going to know about this. If you didn't know about the tutorial before looking at this, then this would be when you would know that. The last thing I have in there is that the actions are recorded in English. I have this listed in every single listing for my actions in my shop, but I still get people messaging me frustrated and annoyed and wanting refunds because they don't work in Adobe Photoshop because it's French or Spanish or anything like that. The reason for this being is because when I record something in Photoshop, Photoshop is literally taking the names of the layers that I'm using and recording it. So they're in English, so it has to be played in English. There's no going around that. That's just how I record my actions, and that's how it is. You can change your Photoshop to English by going to, I can show you real quick, by going to Edit and Preferences and Interface, and then coming down here to Presentation and changing the language to English. If for some reason this isn't here, or you can't find it, or you have problems switching your language in Photoshop, that is not a question or problem for me. That is something you would have to contact Adobe for, because that's their software. This is just an action that I'm using in their software. So, like I said, if you ever need to fast forward through anything, that was a lot, but if you ever need to fast forward through anything in this tutorial, feel free to do so. So now to the specific action. I'm going to go back one more time and play, just so we can read what this says. So it says use, so the message is what applies to each specific action, and then the helpful notes are just extra for on every other action. It says use a soft white brush to brush on warm tones, adjust opacity as needed, or as desired. And then you would just press stop. And then my white soft brush is already selected. If you want to make sure, just come up here and make sure you have the soft round and not the hard round. And you want white. Now if I zoom in, depending on where you're wanting to add the warmth, I usually just add it to their skin. You can just paint. This is a lot on this. Like I said, I'm happy with her skin tone already, but if you want to add it, this is how you would. And now white paint's on, so if you accidentally got it over on something you didn't want, you could just switch to your black brush. I just press X on my keyboard to switch between my black and my white brush, and black brush will just brush that right back off. And then you can just adjust the opacity as needed. So that was on 100%, so you can bring it all the way down to 1% if you want. It's probably not going to make much of a difference, but you have a big range there to play with. Now, instead of flattening, I just realized that this doesn't say up, I actually didn't put an O, so that's funny. It'll be warmio. I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to delete it, only because I'm not keeping that in my edit. But if after you do that, if you kept that, you would just go ahead and right click and flatten your image again. Okay, so cool down, same exact thing. It's just going to cool the image instead of warming it up. I never use this one, hardly ever, because I shoot pretty cool already, so if anything, I'm warming stuff up. But same thing, use soft white brush and adjust the opacity as needed. So you would just, again, brush on. Even if you're just needing to, say like maybe her eyeshadow was like too bright or too saturated, you could just brush it on her eyes. You can use it wherever you want, as much as you want, with as much opacity as you want. Again, you can bring that down or leave it at 100% if you want. I'm going to delete that one because I'm not keeping that in there either. Okay, so my skin and my dress smoothing. This is my frequency separation action, actually. So you may have already have this frequency separation action, but I also upgraded this one as well. So there are some actions in this pack that I did at one point, or still do, sell separately, but I did upgrade it to where you can actually just brush it on now instead of having to select and add your blur manually. So I'm going to go ahead and play that. It may take a little bit longer than the other ones. And now, again, the message, which is the instruction, says to use a soft white brush to brush on skin and the dress, avoid hairlines, lines, and creases, and adjust the opacity as needed. And then it's just saying if you're needing more smoothing, you can play the one directly below it, which is a little bit stronger, which I use this one specifically most of the time for skin, and then I'll do a stronger one for the gown. Sometimes, I don't always have to do that, but if there's like a lot of cellulite on the legs or something in a tighter gown, sometimes I'll use the strong dress smoothing instead. Okay, I'm going to zoom in here. My Photoshop is lagging just a little bit. Okay, and I'm going to use a little bit smaller of a brush, and then I want to show you what it's going to do if I try to just brush over here, see how it does You want to stay away, like it said, you want to stay away from the hairline, away from the edges, and this, because this is just for the skin. It's not, you don't want to brush. Sometimes I see people brush just over the whole image and then just decrease the opacity. I can always tell when people do that, and it's overly done and it doesn't look good. So try to avoid the, that. So I'm just gonna brush this on. You may need to, gosh, my photo, I think it's my mouse that's lagging, maybe not Photoshop. Adjust your brush up and down. Again, you can press X on your keyboard to switch between your black and white brushes if you accidentally brush a little bit too close to the edge of her skin there. And I'm just going to do parts of the dress too. I don't think I'm going to use the strong one on this one because there's a lot of pattern on this one. So you don't want to use it too much on patterns either, because it'll look a little muddy. See, now this crease right here, I went over that, and I don't really want to do that because it'll start to look a little wonky. As you can see, it like almost makes it so the crease blends in, and I don't want to do that. Okay. So now that's all I'm going to add, but I'm also going to decrease the opacity on the layer overall, because I don't want it to be that strong. I still want the texture of her skin a little bit more in there. So that's with and without. I don't do a ton of skin smoothing, just enough to get rid of the obvious blemishes. And then I'm going to go ahead and right click and flatten my image. So the strong, I'm going to go through all of these, but I'm not going to use all of them like I stated before. Same exact thing, it's just this one's stronger, as you can see. Obviously, I don't want to do that for this image, but like I said, if I need something that needed to be smoothed a little bit more, I would use that. Okay, oh my god, you're glowing. This is what I use to pretty much, I mean, it looks like they're glowing. And that and the shine together is what I use to get that effect where a lot of people ask what I did to her skin. So I'm going to go ahead and play that. It's going to say paint the glow over highlights with a soft white brush, avoid brushing over shadows, adjust opacity as desired. Now I'll show you again why I say to avoid the shadows. If I just brush this over her entire face, it makes the shadows really muddy. So I only want to brush this over the highlights. Think of it as like makeup contour. Okay, so I'm going to undo both of those. I'm going to lower my brush just a little bit. And I just want this on the highlights of her features here. Oops. I'm using a different computer working in Photoshops, and I can't remember what my key was for making my brush smaller and bigger in Photoshop. So I keep having to go up there for my brush size. Yes, I do the gown too. I don't just do it for her skin. I want her whole body to pop off of that backdrop. And then on the dress, I don't worry so much about the shadows. I kind of just paint it in where I see the light falling. Okay, and then you can adjust the opacity as whatever you want on this, but for me, my lucky magic number for this is 20. I don't know why. I just always reduce the opacity to 20, and that works well for me, but it probably depends on the exposure of your image, your specific image in Photoshop. Okay, so before and after adding that, see how it just kind of gave her a little bit of that glow. Flatten that shine. Now this is what gives that nice, the shining glow on top of the glow that I add to their skin already with the, oh my god, you're glowing. So it says use a soft white brush to brush onto highlights for a high fashion shine. Adjust opacity as needed. Press stop. Zoom in again. Now this one brushes on pretty strong. I have it the curve set to 50% opacity. inside the action, and you can adjust that as you need to as well. But when you first brush it on, it's a little bit strong. And then I just kind of manually adjust the opacity depending on the type of image that I'm using. So I just go ahead and with my white brush that on. I leave this over here. It makes that a little bit darker, but I like how it looks on the shadows as well, so I typically leave that. And then I will paint off as I need to. Just try to stay off the backdrop because it's going to make that brighter too. Oops, didn't need to do that. My mouse keeps skipping out on me. If there's any parts of your image that you feel like this is too bright on, like right here, I could brush that off right there. Get a little bit bigger. Okay, I'm going to come back in and I'm going to brush it off of these spots because I don't want much on the shadows on the dress or the gown. And then I'm going to, now in here is what I was saying, you can come in and you can adjust this a little bit so it's not as bright. You can come down to the contrast, just double click that, and you can make the highlights a little bit more or less or deeper on there if you want. But I'm going to leave that alone for now, and I'm just going to bring down my opacity on the overall layer. If I toggle that on and off, you can see how much depth that added to her skin and how it just made her kind of pop. Okay, zoom out and do that just to make sure I like the amount that it added there. Decrease it just a little bit more. And that looks good. I like that. So I'm going to go ahead and flatten. Okay, and now lip, eye, and cheek color. You don't always need to do this, but I like to add just a little bit of a pop to the lips and the cheeks. I rarely ever use it for the eyes, but you can use it wherever you want, but that's mostly where I use them. So it's just saying to use a soft white brush to brush on the color. And it says you may double click the color square on your color layer, which is right here. Gosh, my mouse, right here. To change the color and then adjust the opacity as desired again. So I'm going to zoom in. And right now I put it on a color that I use a lot, but you can change it. So first I'm gonna paint it on the color that I have it on. Zoom in, I'm just gonna paint it on her lips. Sorry, white. I was on a black brush. Paint it on her lips. Before and after, I'm gonna lower the opacity. It's already on 75, but I'm gonna lower it a little bit more. And then I'm gonna paint a little bit on her cheeks too, just to kind of adds a little bit of blush. Lower the opacity just a little bit more because I want it to be subtle, because I can already still see her blush and her lipstick there. And then if you want to do the eyes a different color, just go ahead and flatten and run the action again. And then if I wanted to add, like, maybe, let's say, actually I'm going to paint it on first. Come back over it, make sure we're on our layer mask here. Paint on a little bit of color, and then if you double click this and you just go around, it's going to show you what different colors you can do. If I wanted to maybe match the green in her dress, I could use my eyedropper tool and select that. Oops, it's beeping at me. That kind of made it. Actually, that's pretty. That's pretty too. I'm going to use that, and then I'm going to decrease that just a little bit. Okay, flatten. Okay, now deep lines. I like to use this to deepen like around the corset here, like up by the breast area, and like the buttons on anything I kind of want to highlight. I use it on to contour the face a little bit too, and on the eyebrows and eyelashes. So I'm going to go ahead and play that. Okay, and it's just going to say, again, use a soft white brush to deepen and darken the lines. Hairlines, stress creases, eyeliner, everything I just said. Press stop. White brush, 100% opacity, and brush on where I want it. Sometimes I highlight the lips a little, earrings, just random spots to kind of make her stand out a little bit more. Cinch right here by her thumb, her buttons. Just where I kind of want the eye to separate the image a little bit more. For this gown, I like to use it on the florals and some of the spots. Zoom out if I toggle this. Can't really see it when you're zoomed out as much, but if you zoom in, you can see that it definitely darkened up her features here. And her eyebrows are a little much. I'm going to bring it down. It's at 50% opacity right now. I'm just going to bring it down a little bit there. Okay. And then this overlays at 100% too. You can play with that if you want to, but it's not going to do much. Okay, so go ahead and flatten. And then backdrop color change, I don't really use that on white, but you can. I use it more so on like if I'm wanting to change a green to a different color or something like that. But I'm going to show you how to use it, because if you go ahead and press play, this one is for the backdrop specifically, so it's already going to select the backdrop and everything for you. So you have to use your paintbrush to select which color you want the backdrop to be over here in your options over here, and then paint it onto your paint your color layer, and then select the mask on the backdrop layer or background layer, and use your black and white brush to clean up the edges around your subject, and then adjust opacity as needed. So go ahead and press stop. And now I'm just going to do, I'm going to select a color on her gown to change the backdrop color too. I'll make it a little bit more saturated so it's more noticeable on the white. And then make sure you're at 100% opacity. Use a bigger brush and just paint over the backdrop here on this paint your color layer. And then I'm going to bring the opacity down because that's way too bright. If you don't want to bring the opacity down, but you want it to be less bright, I guess I should show that too. Just change your color over here. Just go over to a layer or a color that's not as saturated, and that's going to make it a lot better. Here we go. I tried to make it more saturated so it was more noticeable on the white, but I would not maybe do that on a different color. Okay, and then on that on the pop-up that showed you or told you how to do it, you have to use your black and your white brush on your layer mask right here to add and subtract the color, so you're to blend your subject. So you want to zoom in. This is cleaning up your edges, just like if you were to edit your subject into like a digital backdrop or something. You have to paint off anything that the selection that Photoshop selected did not catch. So I'm going to lower my brush to a smaller size here and use black to brush off of my subject, and then white to brush on if I need to. So go around the whole edge, and it's a little bit harder with tulle fabric because of course the tulle fabric is a little bit see-through, so getting that to blend sometimes is a little bit harder, just like with digital backdrops again. But paint off first, and then if we need to go back and paint on a little bit at a lower opacity, we can. It's one of the biggest mistakes I make in my tutorials for my digital backdrops is I always forget to brush off first because it's so much harder to fix it when you slightly brush on. Okay, I'm actually going to leave the bottom of this for now because I am going to brush some of that back on. I'm going to worry about brushing off. Go around all the edges right here. So white, switch to my white brush, brush that in. And everything else, her hair, up here needs brushed off. Now, depending on what big like the difference is in the color that you're adding, you may need to do more or less brushing on and off. If you're really changing, like it's a dark color and she has like a white gown and it's fluffy, you're going to have a lot harder of a time getting it to blend, and that's just the nature of the game. That's nothing to do with the action. That's just, it's better to prepare for whatever background colors you're going to want to change it to before you shoot the session. Okay, so I'm going to zoom out, and now I want to blend down here a little bit. So I'm going to up my brush size here, and I'm going to go to about 25% opacity, and I'm going to use a white brush. Since this is see-through fabric, I want to be able to see that color through the gown. It helps me sometimes to toggle on and off that color just to see what I'm working with. And I'm even going to do it on the edge of my the dress here, because you would be able to see that little bit of color through the very edges of her gown too. Okay. Before and after. It looks pretty good. Okay, I'm going to flatten that. I would personally just leave this white, but for the tutorial's sake, I'm gonna do it this color. Okay, so I'm gonna go down to object color change. I'm not gonna keep this one on this tutorial because I don't want to change the color of anything in this photo, but this is what I would use for if you wanted to change the color of, like, say, her gown. I'll show you how to use it. So it's similar to the backdrop color, except you need to do your selection, because there's no way for me to be able to tell, obviously, what you're going to want to color change in using the action. So you go ahead and play, and it's going to tell you to just use the selection tool of your choice, whether that be the quick selection tool or the magnetic lasso tool, whatever you want to use, to select your object and then that you're wanting to color change, and then press play again. So I'm going to stop, and then I'm going to grab my quick selection tool and say I want to change the color, I don't know, of just her gown, I guess, because I don't know what else I would change the color of. Again, this is a lot harder if you're using a tulle gown, because it's going to affect the color of her skin too. So I wouldn't do that on this image for that reason. And I just selected way too much. So actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get rid of that selection. I'm going to go to select subject, because that's going to be faster. And then I'm going to use my minus tool to unselect her face and that. Okay, so I have the dress selected, so I'm going to go ahead and press play again like it said to do. And then this is going to pop up and tell me the same exact thing as we did to the backdrop. So we're wanting to paint our color onto this paint your color layer. I'm going to press stop. Say I wanted to change the gown. I have no idea. Let's say to like a pink or a purple. We'll go with purple. Okay, and a soft brush at 100% opacity. We're going to start out with brush on, and then it's just going to apply to that object that you selected. And then you would do the same thing. Obviously, like I said, you don't want to, probably best not to, it's a lot harder to do it to a tulle gown, but you would go around the edges again, which I'm not going to do again since I just did that for the background. But you would go down to your layer mask and brush on and brush off with your black and white brush again to clean up the edges. If you did do this on a tulle gown, you could make it happen. I've done it before, but you would just need to use a lower opacity brush and then just brush off little by little. It would be a lot more work, but this is what you're going to want to use, I recommend, on a solid dress to just change the dress color and not everything else. Okay, so I'm actually going to go ahead and delete those because I don't want to add that to this image. And then the next one on here is my Truer Whites background, which I just color changed the background. So we're gonna kind of, I guess, reverse that, because my truer whites background action I use on my white seamless, my black seamless, and my gray seamless, and that just gets it. It takes out all of the like magentas and reds and all that stuff that you can shoot, that your Einstein or your Alien B or whichever, your Goddix, whatever you're using sometimes, that kicks out those colors. So I'm going to go ahead and I guess I'm going to change this back to white. So we'll just go ahead and press play. Okay, and it says select the layer mask on the truer whites layer and use your black and white brush to clean up the edges around your subject. So this isn't going to be, it's a little less than what it usually is, because I play, like I said, I usually play it on my white, gray or black backgrounds. This one was green, so there's still going to be a little bit of hue in there, but when you use the truer whites, use it on, it's to use on your neutrals, on your grays and blacks and whites. But if I get rid of it here, it did take away a lot of it, but let me see, if I do go back, I wonder if I can go back far enough to actually do this. Oh, I can. Okay. I'm actually gonna get rid of that so I can show you how I used it on the white, but now it still looks green. Now my eyes are all messed up. Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and play that with the white background. And you'll see that it makes it a lot. There we go. Okay. Go ahead and press stop. And then just like when you color change the background, you want to zoom in and check your edges and clean up the edges again. So as you can see, it took out a lot of the color from her gown, so we just want to paint that back in. And you do that with a black brush because you're painting the action you just played off of your subject. If I'm using this on like a white backdrop where I have like a newborn session and the family are wearing white t-shirts, I'll actually brush it on to their white t-shirts too. Or if I have like a maternity model that's wearing a white gown or a black gown or a gray gown, I'll use the action on that too. So it isn't, this one automatically selects the background. That's why it says it's truer whites background action. But technically, like say this was like a white t-shirt, I could just switch to my white brush and make that not part of the background, but I could add that to the gray and white selection. So if somebody was wearing like a white t-shirt on a white background, you could just leave the background painted on, but then also paint on the t-shirt. I'm going to undo that brush stroke real quick because I don't want that included. Okay, I think all the other edges look, maybe not. Let's brush off right here a little bit. Thought I already got this part, but I don't think I did. Okay. Zoom out, and now I'll toggle that and see it got rid of, it just made it a much truer white color and not as, it kind of matched her gown before. There was a lot of yellows and greens thrown into that backdrop, but now they're gone with that action. Okay, go ahead and you can adjust the opacity on that too. If it seems like it's too cool, maybe if you shoot really warm and it's too cool, you can adjust the opacity and bring that down a little so it's not as, I guess, cool. Go ahead and flatten that. Go back to the actions, almost done. So this is, if you're applying a texture, which I do almost like 95% of the time apply a texture to my seamless drops, which if you don't have my fine art seamless paper texture collection, I highly recommend you get it because they're beautiful and I literally don't use anything else for my backdrops unless I'm smoothing the backdrops, which I have an action for that too, which I'm about to show. But if you're applying a texture, don't even worry about smoothing the backdrop, because unless you have like really like something you really need to like get rid of on the backdrop, I still would probably just like use your healing tool or something, but the texture is probably going to hide that. So I wouldn't even worry about the smoothing action unless you want just a smooth background and you're not adding any texture. Okay, so And this is a paint on action because that's what I prefer and that's how I edit. I don't like the one clicks because then I have to go back and do a lot of correcting on places that I don't want it. So I'm gonna go ahead and play this. It's getting there, okay. And then it's going to tell you to use a soft brush, again, white brush, to brush on the blur or on your subject. And if you get any on your subject, which I'll show you, you just use black to brush it off and then adjust the opacity if needed. If it creates banding, I'm going to show you a way that you can correct that without playing the bye-bye banding action, but you can also play that if you need more. Okay, so stop. White brush at 100% opacity. And go ahead and brush on. If you need to see where you're brushing, press the backslash on your keyboard, and that's going to show you. So I like to use a big brush and kind of feather it in and leave just a little bit of space around my subject. Okay, and then get rid of that backslash and then zoom in, because as you can see right here, sorry, let me put my brush a little bit smaller. Right here, it added some that I don't want. So I'm going to press X on my keyboard to switch to my black brush, and I'm going to clean up, brush, make sure to brush that off of her. For the bottom of the dress, I actually leave, if it's not, obviously if it was like huge and completely brushed off, I would brush it back off with a black brush, but I kind of like how it adds like a little bit of, like if I toggle this on and off, see how the edges over here, it just kind of like gives it like a dreamy blend in. I don't even know what to call it. It's not really dreamy, but I just leave that. I don't even brush that back off. I like how it kind of blends the image a little bit more. And then if I toggle that, it didn't have to do a ton of smoothing, but it did. So now you can come over, you can flatten this. I don't even see any banding. Actually, I do. And you can flatten this and play the bye-bye banding action, or you can just come over here to this part of the layer right here, click that, and then go up to filter and noise and add noise. And then just add 1 to 2% is usually plenty. I like to do 1.53. I don't know what it is about me and that number. It's just what I like to use. And that's going to add some noise back in there. But if you want to add more noise, or if you're still seeing banding, just go ahead and play the bye-bye banding action, and that's going to add more noise to your image. That's literally all it is. If you have banding, you need to add noise to your image. Use a soft black brush to brush it off of your subject and adjust the opacity. So I could do that, use the black brush and brush it off of her just so the noise isn't on her face and stuff. And then lower the opacity, because if you zoom in, there's a lot of noise on there now since I already added it once. You just adjust the opacity down until it's to your liking, where you can't see banding or the noise. Okay, or when you play that action, I'm going to get rid of it again. You could press Control-I on your keyboard or Command-I on your keyboard, and it's going to invert it, so it's going to get rid of the noise completely. And then you would use a white brush to brush on the noise instead of a black brush to brush on or off the noise of your subject. Hopefully I didn't just confuse you. Consider that optional. Okay, and then I'm going to bring down the opacity. So different ways that you can do it. Okay, so those are, I think I'm going to add a sharpening action in here too. Maybe. Or you could just go up to filter. I'm going to zoom in when I do this so you can see the difference here. Because her face is a little soft. But you can just go up to filter. Sometimes this is all I do. Sharpen and sharpen. And that added a very nice, pretty sharpen to the entire image. If you want to be able to adjust the opacity, just create another layer and then sharpen it. So that way you can just adjust the opacity. I know that I used to have a sharpening action. I think I still might in some of my some of my older actions, but Photoshop has come out with so many different things that it's literally just like a second to just sharpen it yourself. Okay, so I'm going to go to my history. I'm going to go all the way up to my before and my after. I want to be able to toggle between them, so I'm going to flatten this real quick, select all, edit, copy, go back to my before, edit, paste. So that is the difference between one of my straight out of camera images, or straight out of camera images with the backdrop edited already. But yeah, that's how I edit my pictures. I don't think I'm gonna add a sharpening action in here now that I say that. It's so easy to just another click just to do it yourself. Or maybe I will, I'm not sure. But this action is in the shop. If you have any extra questions regarding it, or you're following the prompts in this tutorial and you're still like getting an error, it's not working, please send me a message. If you are a studio photographer, I would love for you to join my group on Facebook. I'll link in the description. That's another good resource to ask questions, post your work, get inspiration. And then, of course, if you're wanting more tutorials similar to this one, usually they aren't this extensive, go ahead and make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel to be notified when I add more. Sorry, I wanted to jump back on real quick to this tutorial and show you something. If you start using these actions all the time, or you use them a lot and you don't need the prompts anymore at the end, I know they can get a little annoying. I wanted to put in here real quick how to get rid of that if you don't know how and you need to. And what I mean by the prompts here, like when you play the action, this the message that pops up after you play the action. To get rid of that, if you just want to play the action and go, once you are accustomed to using them, all you have to do is when you're over in your layers panel, if you expand any of them, it's going to say stop down here at the bottom, and that is what that prompt is. If you simply go into it and press delete, that's going to get rid of the prompt for you. So if I go into that, let me flatten this real quick. If I go into that and I press delete, it's going to ask delete the selection. Are you sure? Press OK. And then once you play that action, oh, wrong one, sorry. That was one that had a prompt at the beginning. It's going to still do that because that prompts you to select your subject. I did one on let's delete it off of this one. Delete, yes, and then if you play it, it's just going to go ahead and it's going to run the action for you, and then you can start going. Do not delete the stops at the one. It's actually good that I did that because now I can tell you this. Don't delete the stops for like the object selection. I think that's the only one that has the stop at the beginning. Oh, and nope, I don't think that's the only one. Yeah, I think that's the only one I have that does that because I corrected the backdrop smoothing to not do that anymore. So don't delete this one because that prompts you to select your object in the color change. And because if that's not in there, you won't have a selection in there and the action won't work. So don't delete that one. But the ones, all the rest of them that have the stops at the end, the very bottom, you can delete those ones if you don't want the prompts anymore. But there's no way to get them back unless you reload the actions into Photoshop, so keep that in mind.